Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Test-Driven Development in React, the live stream edition. I'm Josh Justice, also known as Coding It Wrong on the web. We're really glad you're here. If you aren't already following me on Twitter, I'd love for you to connect with me there. I tweet a lot, don't tell my boss. And I'd love to interact, just hear what you're up to, what your testing experience is like. I try to hang out in Reactiflux testing room as well, so I'll keep an eye out for you in there. Feel free to ping me and chat about anything testing or TDD related. I love to talk about this stuff and dig in. One more thing you might want to check out, I have a website called Learn TDD In. It's because I love test-driven development and I don't want to work in any framework unless I can do test-driven development in it. And so I put it together to kind of figure out a consistent way to do the same kind of outside-in testing that we're talking about here in all these different languages and frameworks. So check it out. React, React Native, Vue are all listed there. So on this live stream, we're going through test-driven development in React, and we've made some progress. We had a bit of a slower week last week with me running into some challenges, but that's okay because we're experimenting and learning together. We got to do some refactoring and handling of edge cases in the code, but we did not get to the point of form validation. So form validation is some more edge cases that I wanted to handle, and I wanted to look into it together. So we're going to do that today. To remind you what we're working on the repo that we're working on is React TDD live stream. You can find it linked in the resources below the live stream or the YouTube channel. And you can check it out and follow along. I have pull requests. Looks like I have a branch. Oh no, this is the master branch, yeah. But I've got pull requests that I put in here after every week so you can see the work that we did. Play around with it, pull it down locally. Give it a try, see what it feels like to run enzyme and Cypress tests if you're not doing it already. So the app we're building is called Opinion 8. It is an app for tracking restaurants and rating dishes at those restaurants to see if you like them. I just went to get sushi a couple days ago, and that's exactly the kind of place where I like to rate dishes so I can remember what rolls I like and what rolls I don't. So we're going to be using a library called Formik for our form handling. I'm really excited about this because I'm used to it now, the way forms work in React, but like it's a little heavyweight, it's a little heavy-handed, a little bit of boilerplate. And I get why, but Formik makes it just a little bit nicer, and including like a nice simple handling of validation to a Formik form. If you can see this on the video, there's a validate attribute you can pass to it. You can just pass a function, and that's going to validate your data, return errors, and then you can just render it out very simply. So we're going to switch to this. Now feels like the right time to do it. And what we're actually going to be able to do is before we put in any new tests, we're going to refactor under green. So our code is green. We've got passing unit tests. Here we can rerun those and confirm that our test of the new restaurant form component is passing. So that's great. So we've got that assurance as we do it. And then our Cypress end-to-end test is able to run through the whole app and confirm that our one feature we've built so far, adding a restaurant to the list, is passing. So that's going to protect us to make sure that our changes keep anything from breaking. And you really want to refactor while you're under green so that you're adding new functionality at one time and then changing existing functionality to rearrange the code in a new way. So we want to introduce Formik while keeping the behavior of the app the same. Then we're going to be able to use Formik to add the new functionality easier and more simply. I will say if you are watching live on the chat, you can feel free to say hello. I love to interact with folks that are live on the stream right now. So say hello, let me know your experiences with Formik, if you like it, if you have challenges, and what you'd recommend, and help me out if I get stuck, because this is Formik is new to me, but seems straightforward enough. All right, so let's refactor. So as I usually do, I've done a pre-commit, kind of like the cooking shows that put something in the oven 30 minutes ago so that they're ready. I've pre-added things, and actually Yarn runs pretty fast for me in general, but it's been especially good recently. But I already have that commit in. So it's just in the package.json, it's just the Formik package. You add that into the dependencies and you're good to go. So let's take a look at the code. I'm going to move this Formik. Actually, I have a cheater version of the code as I was experimenting with it earlier. So I've got that up on my cheater monitor over here. So let's work on it. And I made some big steps as I went into things earlier. So let's make some small steps now and make sure the tests continue to pass as we go. So remember, now we're just refactoring to get exactly the same functionality using Formik. So up until now, we've been using state and using a controlled component for the input here, so that on change, we pass handle text change. And as a reminder, we're using the input component from React Materialize. One of the nice things about Formik is it's not tied to specific UI components. It just handles the form logic, kind of what's cluttering up a little bit, honestly, our new restaurant form here. So we're going to be able to change that out. So let's import Formik. You may notice that I'm in Atom Editor today. I had a little bit of a spat with VS Code. I to this day, I don't know for sure. Some settings started happening. I think you may have noticed on the live stream last week, actually, that the code was reformatting under me. That's right, that's on the recording. So I've been trying Atom this week, and there's a bunch of niceties of Visual Studio Code that I'm kind of missing. But at the same time, I don't know, like I kind of like a lower level text editor. You know, even if, and it's most likely that I accidentally somehow got those settings in there to auto format the code, but I like having a text editor that doesn't do that auto formatting for me so that those things can't accidentally happen. So we'll see how painful it is to use Atom, and we'll move forward from there. So I've got Formik added in here, and so then what we want to do is wrap our user interface here in the Formik component. So that's going to be the first thing. And just out of curiosity, I'm going to see if the test still passed. It does not, so let's see what happened here. Formik, oh, it's very verbose error, goodness gracious. React children only expected to receive a single React element child. Yeah, and so I think, yeah, Formik wants a function inside of it to render it. So this is actually great. So like, I kind of like the fact that I just did this. So let's make this change very simply before we do anything else. We'll just turn this into a function that's going to render out. And I think I might need to actually have some kind of wrapping component, but let's let the test error tell us that before anything else. What is button like? Yeah, JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did I want a JSX fragment? And yeah, let's do that. Let's do a JSX fragment. All right, so I think that passed. And we're not going to do this for every step, but let's rerun the end-to-end test here. It runs and it passes. Yeah, so just to get a no-op, just to add the Formik component around the form, but do nothing else, we just have a Formik component, and then we have a child that is a function that renders out our form. So that's all we needed for that. I'm not going to make a commit for something this small or anything like that. We'll make a bit of a smaller change to do this. So Formik handles the data that we're currently handling in our component state here. So let's pass to Formik an initial state. Initial values. And I'm going to do it in line here because this feels not too cumbersome, and then we'll see if we want to change that later. Input text is the empty string. So we pass this in as a prop, and then Formik's going to keep track of its own state internally to handle the updates to those. So how are we going to set the state of things? We need to set instead of having the value set from our state and then passing it to our change handler, Formik is going to handle both of those for us. So we're going to receive the destructuring in the parameters here. We're going to receive the values and handle change. So the value here, I can do, let me see if that's right. Yeah, values.input text. And then here we do handle change. And I think in my experimentation, I found that I needed a name attribute on this input. I'm not, oh yeah, actually, no, I tried this out on this application before. So let's just see it failing first, and then we'll get things fixed after that. Yep, and that's our one field here, so we should be good. Here we go. Oh, actually, I didn't even notice this error message before. This is great. Formik cannot determine which value to update. For more info, see this screen. So I can see what I saw before to fix it, but kind of experimenting and comparing. But let's check this out. Okay, so that link to that screen does not seem like that is working anymore. So I'll take that as a to-do to let him or them know that they can update that. Let's say link broken for name error. So, but what I did find, just kind of comparing my code to theirs, was that his text inputs in here had a name attribute as well. And so I think that's what's being passed to onChange. But it's going to receive the DOM event, or the simulated React event. And so that's going to have the name in it. So the name needs to correspond to the property on the value object. So we'll just call this input text, and I think that's going to fix it. No, Formik cannot determine which value to update. That's interesting. Name is... name. This is very interesting. I feel like I had just run this and something that's very similar. So I did change the name of the field, so let's just try that. I don't imagine that's going to change anything. Let's try the end-to-end test to see if that's passing. Nope. Yeah, that did not make it in there. So something is different here. Comparing things. Oh, you know what it probably is? No. The end-to-end test is just showing that the data doesn't come out in the end. Okay. Formik called handle change, but you forgot to pass an ID or a name attribute to your input. So something's different here. So let's try the ID attribute instead. This is very interesting. Let's try the end-to-end test. This is going to be another one of those live streams, isn't it? We're going to do some experimenting. I literally have code posted on the other screen that is working. So let's find out. So other changes I have here, I did have things actually wrapped in a form tag over here, and that's partially so that we could get the button to submit the form. So let's just add one thing at a time and see if it works. This is definitely something where you don't automatically have all the input to know what's happening just from the error messages that are happening over here. Data test. So let's move now handle click up from the form to an on submit. And this is something our test didn't drive us to, but just knowing web development, it's nice to have the form on the on submits, so that the action on the form's on submit handler, so that if you hit return while in the input, it'll submit. That's something we could actually try to drive out in a test in the future, but I don't feel the need to do that. So this is still failing, so let's restart the test just in case something's gotten out of sync. This is why it's good to try these things out in advance, so I can have some sort of sense of if something to compare to. This is very interesting. All right, so let's just check it out. Formik initial values. Oh, you know what? On submit equals this dot handle save. Let's just put all this in. Oh, you know what? Yeah. So there's a handle submit property that's also passed to our function here. So that needs to go in here. Let's see if any of these bring it together. Now we're getting a different error. Is that, let me stop and clear it out to see if the other error is also happening. And maybe it was happening before, and I was just seeing that different error message. You forgot to pass an ID or name attribute to your input. Okay, so actually I did not catch this before by virtue of using materialize inputs. So you've seen last time and this time that there are some challenges involved with using a third-party components, especially for form inputs. There's a lot of benefits, but there's some challenges. And so this is something that we can Google and figure out together. And this is why it's great to do, this is why it's so positive that I'm having these problems. It's great to do these changes in this refactoring before you add new functionality, because now we're not thinking about whether our new functionality has broken things, we're just thinking about the refactoring that we've done. So let me take this back. And now that I've seen that my changes over there had not changed things, let's just do this. Values and handle change. So, okay, so I think I have more confidence that we'll be able to get this solved than some of the things from the live stream last time. Using Formik handle change with React materialize. Formik. Okay, this does not have materialize. All right. So let's see. I bet you we can look into the DOM here and get a sense of what's going on. So let's see here. So we have the input. Name is restaurant name, and you know we can actually render things out. We can actually let's actually stick with handle text change, and we'll console log out the event. This dot handle text change. Let's try this over in Firefox. Open the console. All right. So we have the event here. Native event. Get. Target. Get. All right. So let's try event dot target. And that gives an input with a name. Now it hasn't, so that could be interesting. It could be the ID field that's throwing things off, the name, restaurant name. So now we're looking at the event to see the output of this third-party component library and what it's doing to us, for us. So let's change this to ID. Now ID is in fact restaurant name. Let's just... Okay, actually this looks more promising. So I think... Oh, yeah, so I think... Oh, well that's because I switched off of it. So okay, so now that we've done that, let's switch over to handle change. So instead of using our custom handle text change, we're going to use Formik to try to update the Formik state. So let's try that. Okay, that's allowing us to type in, so that's good news. Let's try our end-to-end test and see how far we get. So now, notice what happens here. When we click submit, the page refreshes. So I think we're moving the right direction. I think we're making progress. So that's helpful to know. I think we needed to set the ID to restaurant name to overwrite the automatic ID that React Materialize was providing. So let's move further. So we have the form, and we submit. That happens. So now instead we're going to put on submit in here, handle submit. So this is, I was actually seeing a similar pattern like this when I was building out a reusable login form recently, where I wanted to be able to render out the custom look and feel of the form, but I wanted that to be just a simple presentational component or presentational function here. But all the functionality, the behavior would be handled in a reusable container component. So that's similar to what we're doing here. Alright, so let's try this. See if our unit test passes. It does not. It says expected mock function to have been called with sushi place, but it was not called. And this makes sense because everything is happening, but Formik, when it gets the handle submit, is not calling back to my handle save up here. So let's try adding this property in here. Formik has an on submit. Some things that happen when you try to submit is that Formik does its thing, but eventually it needs to know when to call back into your code. So we're going to pass this handle save up there. So let's see what happens. Now we're getting that. Now we're getting that error again. That's very strange. So we may not have fixed anything at all. And still not happening. This is very baffling. Okay. On change, handle change, value, restaurant name. Let's just try changing this again in case I've gotten something wrong. Yeah, I must not have tested this very closely before. You know what? Actually, it could be related to this. So let's change out the handle save a bit more to get it correct, just in case that helps. We don't need the input text anymore. We do need the on save past this parent component. What we want in here, so handle save is going to receive some different properties from Formik. It's going to receive values. That's going to be the first thing. And so let's come back to this. So we're going to extract restaurant name from values. Let's see what that does. So that actually makes our end-to-end test pass. So sushi place is coming back out of things, so that's good. It was interesting. Let's see what happens if we reopen the form. So sushi place is actually there. It's not reset. We didn't end up getting a test to handle that. So we could put that back in, but last time we did not. So what I will do, again, this is kind of minor, so I don't feel the need to have a test covering it. I'm going to take reset form in here and just call reset form inside the handle save, which I think should reset things in the Formik form. So this opens up, and now when we open a new restaurant, it's cleared out. So that's nice. So our end-to-end test is passing, but our unit test, our component test is not. And this was happening before. So we'll see what we can figure out here. Formik cannot determine which value to update. So this is making me feel like this error may be an enzyme error, that the event that's happening is not passed along correctly. And I think that reminds me of the fact that in the enzyme test, we call something called simulate to simulate the event. And so, yeah, so check this out. So we simulate a change, And the change, we give it an event, the event has a target, and the target has a value, because in the past, that's all the detail we needed. But now, because enzyme is working at a lower level here, it's more coupled to what's happening in the DOM. And so our minimal event here is no longer sufficient. Formik requires more. So this is really interesting. This is a trade-off of using enzyme for component tests. It's a little bit more fragile. We have to make a bit more of a change here to get things to pass. So let's see if we can get this working. So it would be on the target. I don't know if I'm going to love how this formats. No, that's not going to be acceptable. I'm going to need to format it. If it's going on multiple lines, I'm going to need to do some kind of standard consistent multi-line format. So yeah. So we got target value sushi place, and then we'll say, what did we do in the form? We said that it's going to have a name of restaurant name. That's what we did here at least. Name restaurant name. Now we rerun the unit test. Now it says not called still. But we're not getting that error before from Formik, so that's not the problem. So interesting. Target is restaurant name. This is just very interesting. All right, so both of our tests at the unit test level are failing. We expected the mock function to be called, but it was not called. And we expected the value to be empty string, but it was still sushi place. So looking at the code, what would cause that to happen? It could be that there's a time delay in how reset form works, and we need to put some kind of time delay in here. Interesting. So I feel like Kent C. Dodds and Jack Franklin on my tests, tests resources that I've looked to have referred to that kind of thing before. But here, the mock function especially should be happening synchronously. It calls the onSave handler. So, okay. So let's just kind of put some console log output in here to see if we can figure out what's going on. And we'll save. This props. The onSave save handler is being passed in as a prop. You know, it might be related to the fact that I changed the button to submit the form. So let's try, I'm going to try putting the onClick back in here instead of in the form itself, and we'll see if that changes it. Reset, cannot read property, reset form of undefined. Oh, wait a second. No, we want handle submit. That's what we want. No. Expected mock function to be called, but it was not called. This is very interesting. So yeah, so this lower level component test is failing, although the end-to-end test is still passing. So there's coupling to the specifics of what Formik is getting into. Interesting. Save new restaurant button, simulate click. So let's go back to the form, and we'll try to simulate a submit onto the form. Find the form. Simulate submit. No, that has not done it. So you can see that this refactoring can be very challenging. This is giving me more challenge than I thought it was going to. So I think, I mean, although it embarrasses me a bit to say it, it looks like I'm going to need to kind of pause on this unit test for now, and we're going to need to do this refactor just under the end-to-end test. So this is definitely not something I would have planned out, but it is helpful to demonstrate it that sometimes you can find that your unit tests are causing more trouble than the benefits they're giving you. And so we're going to have to take a pause on the enzyme test here. And I'll look into this next week and come back the following week with an update on how I was able to get it working. So fix unit test. Put that on my to-do list. So we're just going to cancel out Jest for right now, and that's just where we're going to be. So we're going to rely on Cypress here. And again, this is one of the advantages of running through an end-to-end test, because it's going through real browser setup. If things work in the browser, it should work in the Cypress test as well. It's not 100% sure, of course, but you get a lot closer to confidence, a lot closer to like a level removed from what's going on. And I want to be able to use Formik, and I want to be able to use React Materialize. So I shouldn't let challenges to testing keep me from getting there. So we'll move forward refactoring under this end-to-end test. And I think what we might actually do when we get to adding the new features, the new functionality, is we'll drive those out under end-to-end tests, because that's what we have available to us right now. And then we'll evaluate that and see if there's pain or if it works well. And then we'll go afterwards, for the following week, we'll see what kind of unit test I was able to set up, and we can see whether those unit tests are more preferable for these edge cases. So now we have our form still working, and we've refactored to Formik. So let's do an actual commit here on this. Oh, but first, so now I made the smallest changes that I could, and so now the form is working, but I haven't removed some of this unessential change. I'm going to remove the state and the handle text change, because that should not be needed. We'll rerun our end-to-end test. Oop, cannot read property input text of null. And this is because I'm pulling input text out of the state even though I'm not using it. So let's rerun it again. And it all still passes, so that's fine. So let's see what else we can remove. Well, we can remove this here as well, for sure. Let's see if anything else is unessential, because I was experimenting there. We have the initial values for our form. We have on submit. Here it goes to handle save. Yeah, so our form, when it is submitted at the DOM level, it calls Formik's handle submit. That does the Formik thing, and then ultimately it calls our on submit that we pass to it, which is handle save. Handle save pulls out the value, the restaurant name value out of things, passes it to the on save function that was passed in here. So we see our component tree happening here, where there's the rest of our application with a save request that it passes in. Then Formik does its handling, this kind of form generic stuff, and then we have our specific things here where we call back through and reset the form. So this is good. I like the state of things here. So let's add it. Let's review what we've added here. We add Formik into our component. Our state and then our controlled component stuff goes away, and instead we're pulling things out of the values that is passed to us by Formik. So this is now a Formik specific component. We have on save, we have reset form. That happened there, that's great. We're no longer extracting from state. Instead, in here we have Formik, and we have the form itself nested inside. And then we have, the test stuff that we don't, so this is great. I'm glad I reviewed the changes here, because this test stuff, we don't want to commit, because that was not working. Okay, factor, use Formik. Refactor to use Formik, and we'll undo our test change. And so our tests are not passing right now, and that's okay. It's actually kind of helpful to leave them in there not passing so we can remember the state of things, so I won't accidentally merge this down to master until I get that passed and working. Okay, so let's talk about what we were hoping to do. We were hoping to get a validation error showing up through Formik, and Formik provides that for us. So we don't want to implement it yet. We want to go through the test first. And again, I might do a spike like the first time, and this is actually the first time that I've messed with validation in Formik. So on my own, informally, I might mess around with the validation errors to get them to show up without doing them in a test-driven development way. But let's stay by the book. Let's stay the formal way that I would do it once I was familiar with Formik and once I wanted to have real rigor there to make sure our app was safe. Because we want test coverage to make sure our validation errors are happening. So right now in our end-to-end, that's our unit test, so let's close that. We don't need that. We can just close all the tabs. In Cypress, in our end-to-end test for adding a restaurant, so we confirm modal is not shown at the start, modal can be canceled, and modal allows adding restaurant. So that's great. So we can add another kind of step in the process right here. And I think I'm not going to refactor this long test out into separate methods yet, because we might actually decide to do this with unit tests later. So I'm going to just add another step in the middle of here, but it's getting to the point where it's getting long, and maybe we want to change that. Modal displays validation errors. So we want to go into the Add Restaurant button to open the Add Restaurant modal. And then now, instead of typing in the new restaurant name, we want to click Save next, and we want to confirm something. And I'm not actually sure yet. I think we're going to be able to render out the validation error ourselves, but let's just write the code we wish we had. We wish we would have like a new restaurant name error. Again, using a data test selector to select things that are specific to our content. And this is actually great. So, a quick point about this. Notice that Formik wanted us to either provide a name or an ID functionality-wise to allow it to work with the inputs correctly. So that might have required us to change what we had already in here. But we didn't have to change the data test attribute because only our tests are coupled to that. So that was a nice separation. So I'm going to check new restaurant name error. And so let's say, let's see here, should not be visible, contains, yeah, just say contains. Let's just say cannot be blank. I never know for sure how I want to phrase error messages, so that's better than nothing. Cool, so let's check this out. We're going to confirm here that the restaurant name says cannot be blank, and then afterwards we're going to type in the restaurant name and make sure that it all gets cleared out. Let's rerun our end-to-end test. And now, new restaurant name error. So instead of showing that error, it actually closed out the modal, and it did submit a new row to our restaurant row list with that empty restaurant name. So we want to validate. So let's check on Formik real quick to look at their docs. I know the font size here is a little bit small, so sorry about that. But we can see even in the just very simple example here, validate takes a function. And we're not going to do the function inline, because just like my coworker Scott says, it's just like, that's too many concerns all combined together. I want this to be a separate function, so we'll do that way. But this function receives values. You can check and set some errors with a key for the name of the field that the error is for, and then we return any errors that we found. So that's great. That's nice and straightforward, so let's try that. I have not actually touched Formik validation errors before, so we'll see how smoothly this goes compared to how things have been going. So it says validate. It's interesting that this attribute is named validate and this one's named onSubmit. We'll just call it this validate, and we'll call a validate function up here at the class component level. Wouldn't need to be. This could just be a plain function, so it would work just fine with functional components as well. And that could be something interesting we could try at the end here. We could potentially change the new restaurant form to be a functional component and see how the test still covers in that case as well. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we'll do that today. So we want a validate method. We do want to use a class property error function to bind the this context to it. All right, so validate. So we want to return. Let's just follow the convention they have there. Let errors. I do const since we're not reassigning it. Return errors. Let me just before I add in the to do validate. Let's just make sure nothing is broken here. This is a very small step you can take when you have low confidence, just to make sure you don't do any work while things are still broken. So things are still broken in the same way that it was broken before. We haven't broken anything additionally, which is always a plus in my book. So now we want to validate, and I'll just look there. Yeah, we just are manually checking. In this case, they do an if, else if, with some interesting formatting of the line breaks to check, and they, under these, in here we set one error for the field. And that makes sense because for most user interface that I do, you'd only show one error message, one validation error for a field at a time. So here all we're checking is required. So we can just say if not values dot restaurant name errors restaurant name equals could, let's get that error text, cannot be blank. All right, so if the restaurant name value is absent, then we say it cannot be blank. And I think we could, the value should always be a string. So I think, I don't know, let's compare to the string right here. I don't know why, that's just what I want to do right now. So this should, I think, pass our test. We'll see if I've done it all right. We reload. Oh, okay. So it's not dismissing the modal anymore, but it's not showing the error message. And this makes sense, actually. So this means, so Formik calls our validate method, and then if the errors object we returned has any errors in it, then it's going to not call the onSubmit that we passed it. So that's some of the validation and form submission flow that Formik handles for us, but now we just need to do the display of it. So let's check the Formik docs. We can see that No, where that example is. Yeah. So in the function that renders out our form, we can receive an errors object as well. So this is starting to get a bit long. I think I might want to refactor this after we finish, but let's just go from here. So now we have an errors object, and we can potentially output errors for the field. Let's see if React Materialize has any built-in way to output the errors. Because I'm lazy, and I don't want to have to style something myself. I would be afraid to. Form. All right, pre-filling, file input, stay on target. Scrolling very fast here. Let's search error. Ooh, forms prop types error. That's exciting. All right, well, let's just try this and see what happens. It probably won't have that type that we said before. So let's say value error equals errors. Errors restaurant name. Let's see in our end-to-end test what happens. So it runs. Well, so it lays out on the screen poorly, but we do get the error save cannot be blank. So it turns out that we just are not finding it inside the data test selector here. So this is again a place where if we were writing our form from scratch, we could set up all the markup ourselves and have things. Instead, we're going to like sort of back into this by inspecting the DOM and seeing what attributes it has. This is data. This is the error. Label for input O. Interesting. Okay, cool. So this is inside the input field, but that doesn't have any name. So I'm trying to think about like what's a good way to address this. So it has the for that refers to the ID field for the input. So that's something that we could actually use. This is not ideal in that, you know, we're not having full control over what's outputted here. We could have the error output as just a separate text field down here if we wanted to, but let's do it in a way that's a bit more coupled to Formik here. That's okay. I'm okay with that. I mean, I want to explore the options that Formik gives me and see how I feel about them. So let's see if we've got an existing DOM element that we don't have control over what's rendered out, how we could select it. Let's try to set the ID restaurant name on the React Materialize, React Materialize input. So now let's inspect cannot be blank. And now it's the label for restaurant name with the data error attribute. So I think we can target it that way. And let's see, hopefully that ID there hasn't broken anything else. I actually might want to remove this name field if we don't need both the ID and the name. So yeah, we want to change the test to target this in a different way. So we're going to target a label that is for restaurant name. Is that right? Label for restaurant name. And I want one that also has a data error attribute. Do I want that? Let's see what happens. Let's see. Looks like it was found, but I'm checking to find the content. So check it out. So it found that the element label, but it never did. It never did find cannot be blank within it. Okay, so let's see here. So I'm actually looking into what features Cypress offers here. I clicked on this label. It said it outputted something to the console. And it found the element. Label class for a restaurant name data error cannot be blank. So this is interesting. Okay, so check this out. This is the label. This is an existing label element for the field. I think what happens here is, so this is kind of getting to know the DOM of this third-party package. So as we inspect this, so this restaurant name here is the label, and then when I click on it, that label animates up to the top there, and you can see that through the developer tools that are highlighting it. So that then gets the data error attribute. So really, I just want to check that there is a label for restaurant name that has the data error cannot be blank. That's I think all we want to check. So cannot be blank. Now I might just be able to say cy.get, or maybe exists. I think there was an exists, so let's try exists. This is saying that the line is too long, so let's put this onto the next line. Cy is exists. Okay, so now I think maybe should to be visible, because if it exists and is invisible for some reason, that doesn't help us. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so this is passed. We've actually gotten an error in the console here about something else that Formik is requesting for us to do. Most of browser's default button elements to type submit. If this is not a submit button, please add type button. So it seems like, I mean, that's a warning. It would be nice to not have warnings anyway, so probably we should resolve that. But let's focus on doing one thing at a time. So our form is now submitting, and so what this means, let's look back through this. When we try to submit with a blank text field, we're going to get the error cannot be blank. So let's see that ourselves to confirm that in action. Add restaurant, we click save, and it just says cannot be blank. So this actually displays not bad on this screen layout here. Let's look as it gets smaller. So save wraps down to the next row like that. So that's not nice. So maybe let's look at that visual in a minute. But let's do one thing at a time. So if it cannot be blank, that happens. And then we type it in. It goes in and shows up. It's submitted and it's good to go. So this is great. So I want to go ahead and do a commit now to handle this. So we add our test. In our test, we're confirming that an error message should appear and prevent it from being submitted, that it cannot be blank. And then we have our validate method here in our form component. Yeah. And so we're adding the errors property in here and displaying that error using Formik's approach. Okay, so add restaurant name required validation error. So we went red when we added our test in, and then we went green by getting this to pass. And so now this time you're going to get to see a lot more of the refactoring step than before. So refactoring wise, so one thing that I would like to do, well, a really simple thing that I'd like to do is to fix this error message that Formik is giving us. I would like to have clean warnings all the time. Other than this React Dev tools we're not going to be able to get out of for now when running in Cypress. So let's just give the button a type. It's type submit. We want to make that clear and explicit. And now that's fixed, and that's great. And see, when you have test coverage, you're more encouraged to do these small enhancements because you don't have to go through and manually test things again to confirm that they work. So we'll make this a separate commit. Fix Formik warning about button type. So that's all combined in, and that's nice. What else? So another thing was, so looking at this, like this render method's getting a little long now. So Formik has some different things passed to it. I'm not too worried about those. But this function passed inside here, like seeing a function in the midst of JSX, it's not my favorite. And so I think I might like to separate this out. And this can kind of show the higher level configuration of Formik itself, and then the lower level output of the form. And this could even lead to us refactoring this to functional components. But I feel more confident about extracting this to a method than I do about turning the whole thing into a big function. So let's extract this to a method first. We'll just literally cut it and paste it out here. Render form. And we'll do, we're going to want to do a class property arrow function to bind the, well, actually, that looks like that doesn't even need this context bound. Interesting. That's kind of cool. But I'm going to leave it a class property arrow function for now. So this has been pulled out, and so for here, we're just going to do this.render form. So let's save. Let's rerun our Cypress test. And it's all passing. It's looking good. So now we can commit with confidence. Extract form rendering to class method. All right, so let's see what we have here. We have validate, save, render form, and then the overall render method here. Now this is much more readable. We can see that we have a row with Formik going on and then render form inside. The row, depending on how things are formatted with React Materialize, the row could potentially go inside there, but I'm okay with how things are now. This seems fine. So let's draw our attention over to the test now. So in the test, this is getting kind of long. We have multiple segments here. Modal not shown at the start. Modal can be canceled. Modal displays validation errors. Modal allows adding to restaurant. And this is getting, it's long enough that I'm kind of uncomfortable. Like I don't prefer to actually write all this stuff out. So let's extract this out. So you can have, given that this is just a Cypress test is a normal Mocha test, you can have multiple its in here that would go through these different steps. But they would rerun the setup. And so it can be good in end-to-end tests in general to do what's called a feature tour instead, where you go sequentially through a list of steps and do one thing at a time. So this sequence is good. It's just having it all here at like a single, low level of abstraction that makes it a bit hard to follow. So each of these labeled sections, in general in your code, when you have a method or a function that has multiple sections with comments above them, it can be a good idea to pull those out into named methods instead, or other named functions. So we can do that, and we can actually have it be just plain functions that exist down here. So let's do that. We'll create a function. We'll call it modal not shown at the start. And that can just take this out. Even though this is just one line, it's sort of one conceptual thing that we're doing. And the CY is just a global, so we don't need to do anything there. Modal not shown at the start. So let's confirm that Cypress still runs. Cypress still runs just fine, because that's just more functions that are being called. That's all nice and straightforward. So let's do the next one. We don't need this comment anymore. Let's do modal can be canceled. We don't need any arguments here. I think we'll see in a minute that we can send some arguments along, and that can be useful. Copy these down there. And I don't feel the need to run the test again at each step, so let's just kind of go on and create the other functions. Modal displays validation errors. We add those tests in there. And then modal allows adding restaurant. So notice that these aren't entirely independent. So like if we commented out displays validation errors, then this one would break. Let's see that. Let's actually see that happen, and then we can kind of improve it. Can also show a problem with having some of these edge cases in an end-to-end test, which is why I want to try to figure out on my own time, not annoying you with the long periods of me being silent on the stream, and figure out how we can get a unit test going. A fortuitous error. Modal allows adding restaurant, so we paste these in here. And notice we have a restaurant name variable. So we could just move that restaurant name down into here, but I think it's nice to have it exist at this level because it's going to potentially, we're going to be able to explicitly pass it into these other functions to show what variables are being pulled in and what's being used. So we'll just pass this restaurant name in here as an argument, and then we'll delete this out. So check this out. So now we set the restaurant name, we visit the page, and then we have 4 different kind of sub-tests that we call, but they all happen sequentially in a sort of stateful state. So our end-to-end test still passes, so that's really great. So now let's see what happens when we comment out. Say like we decide we don't want to test validation errors at the end-to-end test level anymore. We'll comment out displaying validation errors. Well, so now we try to get the new restaurant name and type sushi place in, but then it says the element is not visible. And so this is because the modal displays validation errors had to click to open the modal, but then after the error, the modal stayed open. We didn't need to reopen it again down below here. So really what we should do is go into here, kind of start out on a nice clean slate after each of these steps. So we'll close the modal after the validation error appears, and then we'll reopen it here. So that's the little bit of duplication, which is going to slow things down, but I think it's going to get things more reliable for us. We rerun our end-to-end tests, and everything works. And then we can add back in our displaying of validation errors, and that works as well. We just see the modal popping in and out a few extra times. Cool. So let's commit these changes. So we're adding in these separate function steps to our end-to-end test, and then we just split up our steps down below there. Really just adding these separations in between, plus these few extra steps. Break E2E test up into step functions, and that'll be added in. So one more thing, and it looks like here's something I'd like to do next. Another edge case we can potentially test. I noticed kind of as that test was flying by that I think if we get a validation error and cancel out, let's see if it's cleared out or not. So we open the form, we click save, we get the error cannot be blank, and we click close. Now if we open it again, the validation error is still there. So I'd like that to be cleared out instead. So let's see if I can figure out how to do that. Should we figure out how to test it? I think we should. So let's consider this being a separate step. Modal clears out validation errors when closed. We'll confirm that it clears out the validation errors when closed. So we'll just put it down here. And then in here, we're going to open it, save it, close it. We don't need to check the validation error again. And then we open it again. And then we're going to confirm that this cannot be blank error should not be visible. And then we can close it again. So this should fail. We're doing TDD. We expect this to fail. Well, I got a syntax error, so that definitely fails. Oh, function. Okay, so let's let Cypress time out. This element is not visible. The save button is not visible. It's being covered by another element. Restaurant cannot be blank. So that's interesting. So Cypress, as it's actually rendering this out, this visual problem we have is actually causing a problem here. So that's actually kind of nice. I was sort of procrastinating on that one, but the test is actually driving us to fix that as well. So let's fix that. Interesting. All right. So probably it might relate to the input and the button. The simplest way I could think of to do that is just to put the input and the button on separate rows. And so although we had this, so check this out. This is the fact that on a small screen, the input and the button, I kind of styled them to be one above the other to kind of wrap down. So yeah, that's okay. That is more important for our test to pass than for that layout to happen. So let's just put some rows in here. We'll take out this responsive styling. We'll just have the input with a row and another row here. This is kind of changing one thing while we're testing something else, but you're getting to see the real me, the not always playing by the book me. Let's retest this. Okay, the visuals are still not perfect, but it's at least passing the test, and it's at least better. This is not wide enough, though. That's not nice. So let's put that back in. All right, so let's just say small, and everything above that, it should be 12 wide. Same for the button, although it seems like React Materialize doesn't style buttons to certain widths. So actually, let's remove that, because if we're not using it, let's not have it in there. We have that row, remove this row, Formik goes over. Let's try it now. Okay, oh, yeah, so I forgot. What I'm looking at here is that our text field is full width, so that's nice. Save, again, there's a little overlap. We could maybe work on that later. But the save button is clickable, and then we expected the label not to be visible. So we've gotten the test to correctly show that, that we haven't cleaned up the validation. Yeah. So let's commit our changes to the form that aren't related to that test, kind of on their own. Fix small size layout. Let me phrase it better. Fix error label overlapping submit button on small screen width. So that's that. So now we just have our end-to-end test that's checking if we clear out the validation errors. So let's see about that. So I would think that reset form would clear out the validation errors. So let's take a look over in the Formik docs and see what we can find out. Well, let's Google it. Formik reset validation errors. Oh, you know what? Interesting. I have a theory. Just kind of thinking about this. Well, no. It should run again. So yeah, validate must be running again because it's actually getting to the point where it's submitting, but it seems like it's not re-rendering it. Interesting. And so if our modal went away, the modal is getting us again. Ah! If the modal went away out of the DOM, then when it came in again, I think we get a new render of the Formik form with those initial values thrown in. So if we wanted to, we could like have our new restaurant form component be knowledgeable about the fact that the modal is not always rendered, and we could remove it out of the DOM. But let's see if we can kind of figure this out. Another way to do it: format force validation errors to be cleared. Passing form errors from outside. Yeah, these Google results are not obviously helping me. So let's kind of look into the validation documents a bit more. Form level validation. Validation schema, that sounds complicated. Ooh, that looks actually pretty nice. The yup. That's interesting. Yup for object schema validation. That could be very cool. I might have to try that out in the future. Alright. Manually triggering validation. I don't think that's what we need. When does validation run? Displaying error messages to do. No! Can I return null as an error message? How do I determine if my form is validating? Can I return null as an error message? Use undefined instead. Form submission. Let's look into here real quick, and then if we can't figure this out, that'll be it for today. Follow up pre-submit validation. Are there errors? All right, so check this out. If there are errors, abort submission, set is validating to false, set errors, set is submitting to false. No, set is validating to false, proceed to submission. Proceed with running your submission handler. You call set submitting false in your handler to finish the cycle. So that looks promising. Let's try that out. There's kind of some statefulness within this functional approach. And that seems like right, set submitting to happen before we call our onSave. Oh wait, no, that doesn't make sense. After that's done, and I might need to look more at what the difference between set submitting and reset form is. Maybe it's just giving us control to do both separately. No, that does not do it. Maybe it restores the default value, but then it doesn't like the fact, it kind of reruns the validation. So let's try one more Google there. Formik, do not run validation when calling reset form. Let's see here. You can call reset form here. Short. Props to you, as we like to say in the React world. Suggested change. If it was a bad value, like just something that's not a valid restaurant name, we could clear that out. Yeah, this should be hitting. Yeah, the key is when the form first displays validation is not run, we just want validation not to run when we call reset form. So I'll look for one more thing. Not for that, for Formik. Formik. Let's drill into the API here. On reset. Form handler. On submit. Formik bag. Let's find out the Formik bag. Sure seems like object state to me. The Formik bag. Set errors. Set errors could help. Or maybe even set touched. So let's try a few of these. Set touched. Nope, that did not do it. Set errors. See if set errors was correct. I think I remember that. Nope. All right. Set value, set submitting, set status. Let's see what set status is. Used for controlling arbitrarily top level state. Okay, yeah. So that's for something else. That's not it. Errors, field error, field touched. Let's see what reset form says it does. And with that, this will clear the errors in touch set as admitting to false, is validating to false, and rerun map props to values. Yeah. Reset form seems like it should be doing it, so that's interesting that it's not. So I'll have to look into that as well. Let me make a note about that. See why reset form not clearing validation error. It's fun together to run into challenges that I'm not able to fix on the stream, so you'll have extra material for next time if you want to check it out. Hey, thanks so much for joining today. That's it for today for the stream. We made some progress. We ran into some challenges. So next time, in the next week, I'm going to be digging into enzyme and see what I can do to get it still passing using Formik. And kind of growing some understanding there. We might even need to switch off of enzyme to something else. That could be an interesting experiment to do. So we'll see if we end up doing that. Thank you for joining. This recording is going to be available on my YouTube channel, so check it out there. Hit me up anytime on Twitter at Coding It Wrong or on React to Flux as Josh Justice, and would love to chat with you about React testing, test-driven development, and how you're doing with it all. Let's continue on this adventure together. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Let's go to the slide. See ya.